some life-changing moments as a result. I didn't say no to working on the Sunday. I didn't say no to working for free as their film critic for a year. I just, so when you say finding ways to put it all back together, imagine the stories I have to share now, right?
Perfect, Mohit. Thank you for joining us here today. We had a little bit of technical trouble. Start jumping in.
I thought I was going to be in the studio.
Yeah, man, I missed that studio. I just shared that picture today on LinkedIn about our first recording from 2 years ago. Missed that studio a lot, but COVID allows us to do this much easier.
Right, and we connected on LinkedIn, and I have to tell you, I've used your YouTube page as an example to other podcasters. So this is kudos to you in the idea that you found a way already to step the game up a little bit, which is that's different. And right now you can tell how important that is based on what some people are trying to do to launch their own podcast. Mm-hmm. So I was really impressed by, and I have been really impressed by the video portion of your podcasts. In many cases, I haven't really even been interested in what the person's saying, and I'm just more interested in how you're lighting stuff and how you're trying to create a mood for conversation. So yeah, kudos to you.
Hey, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. So you're a co-founder of Thinkstart Inc. It's a collective of freelancers, as you put it, right? Yes. And part of the things you help with is helping people start podcasts. I was gonna jump right into that because that's like the wave right now, right? Podcasting, podcast companies, podcast enabling services, they're really kind of taking off. So would love to go right into a deep dive with that.
Sure.
So starting with you, what's your background?
Yeah, so I actually was one of the first podcasters in the city of Toronto.
Okay.
Surprisingly, I did the Blog TO, Movies TO podcast back in 2006. So understanding the genesis of the RSS feed, hyperlocalization, how it was going to factor into browser, how audio branding was going to work. I mean, I have a history in radio, so to see the transition into podcasting for websites was the first to see how people were going to use and bridge the two different mediums. So from a studying perspective, then, I guess you can think of it this way. Working in mainstream media for the last 20 years, you could see where the real content houses were originally, right? These were the only people that were creating volumes of content. So I saw all the dips into podcasting that many of these brands tried, but didn't know what the value was going to be. And it wasn't until the last 3 years that I started to realize that, wait a minute, there's a much bigger content play happening in the podcasting world, from internal communications right to what you're doing, which is thought leadership. And I've been able to capitalize on it in multiple different ways, mostly from a leadership perspective. So, for example, I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
No, absolutely. Yeah, keep going.
From a leadership perspective, I've done everything from programming, internal networks that are about to launch. In my last project I did with Air Canada, we worked on what the Canadian content was going to be in the podcasting world within the airline side of things, because they dealt with an American distributor. On my own, currently I have a partnership that I'm working on with Telefilm Canada on a project. Actually, it's a project that thankfully was sponsored by Telefilm Canada. It's not directly with them. So it's been great because I work on the audio strategy in a much broader sense about where the opportunities lie, rather than just, hey, you should do a podcast and everybody should be on board, hold hands and put it on Libsyn and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. I had to mute my mic for a bit. It's a lot of background noise, but no, I think that's really cool. Like being one of the first into podcasting. Like for me, this is accidental, right? I started listening to podcasts a lot, 2 years ago, and Gary Vee started popping up on my timeline on Instagram, yelling at me. It's like, you have to be creating content. You have to be creating content. So I'm like, okay, let's create some content, and started getting into it accidentally. But people who have been doing it for a while, I mean, now it's a lot easier. There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of know-how books and stuff like that, right? Like looking back at historical, people started super early didn't really have much context to go on. It required a little bit of technical ninja skills to kind of put everything together, to to stream your stuff online, to have RSS feeds, to get people to subscribe to it. What were you doing that was a little different from everybody else?
Oh, it's funny that you say that, because so you won't see my digital imprint in the podcasting world from a consistency from 2006. I got to study it, right? So
Mm.
when I obviously did it first, like I hosted but after the 2 years of understanding how hard it was for us to translate the audience from what we were building with BlogTO at the time, because that's what it was, right? It was everybody trying to find blocks to capture a bigger audience. And to be honest with you, podcasting in North America isn't used the same way as it's used around the world. There's a
Hmm.
huge educational component to the way it's being used in Europe right now. In Asia, it's one of the single biggest resources for people learning business skills from North America. So it's not really happening in just the, oh my God, did you see this week's episode? I was so great. I had a great conversation. That unfortunately is our inherent viewpoint because of how much radio we listen to as kids. But what you're doing right now is you're creating what the kids are going to create podcasts based on. So your opportunity right now is to really hone in on what your quote unquote superpower is in the audio space. If you start falling victim to trying to create podcasts that are the same as the ones you listen to, then you're just creating therapy sessions for yourself. You're not necessarily moving the needle on it. And you as
Mm.
an innovator aren't sitting here with a headset on having this conversation with me just because you want people to say 10 years from now, remember that great conversation you had with Mohit? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's it's the start of something. So while I can't sort of take claim in this idea that I saw all the potential, blah, 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 no, I instead was learning along the way, because it's not an isolated medium. It's part of your building blocks. You talk about Gary Vee, and I've started to talk a little bit in the idea that why do we have so many companies selling you on marketing stacks? Shouldn't it be a content stack? Shouldn't it be something where you can stop and say, okay, I'm willing to give 30% of my time each week to creating content that's going to be marketing, that's going to be points of business, that it's going to be growing my audience and something for the culture. That's 4 hours of my time, and these are the platforms I'm going to invest in, and that's what's going to yield. That's how we have to start to look at these things, right? We don't
Mm.
need, yeah, because we don't need another podcast. You're right. Well, as soon as anybody, you know, or the other thing I hear often is people saying, "Oh, we tried that." And then I ask, I'm like, when did you try it? What did you try? And tell me why you failed. Like what could you have done that made you say, I never want to do this again, right? Like what happened back then? Because now people are starting to realize the rules aren't the same. It's not like every week you need to deliver something. Every month you need to have 400 more subscribers. Heck, man, there's some people right now that are building podcasts just so that they can put their advertisements in.
Mm.
They have no real point to what they're doing. They're just like, remember, we're doing this, and don't forget to come to this, and we're doing this. But anyway, so did you see any good movies lately? Like, it's just like, oh, okay. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about what the medium has to offer, especially as more and more people are forced into it. Because look, if you're a leader at a company right now, tell me podcasting isn't amazing for you to be able to spread the gospel on what your company's doing, right?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. You covered a lot of great points that I've been mulling about as well. Scott Galloway talks about this. It's 1.1 million podcasts in North America, 1.1 million podcasters,
Wow.
right? And less than 1%, less than 10,000 of them are profitable just on podcasting, aka have enough of an audience to charge enough for ad revenue or another source to make it into a self-fulfilling business. Meaning the remainder are doing it as a secondary or tertiary thing for their main line of business, right? So they do X or they do Y, and then they do the podcasting to capture an audience space to bring to convert into their business stream, right? And that's a space that I'm really interested in, because the evolution, like you're saying, that evolution I'm seeing that is like, rather than doing a cold call or rather than doing like a a cold email or outreach or even a LinkedIn reach out, right? By creating content, you get to spread your message, like you said, spread your gospel. One, with the type of guest you bring on, you get to like have like an intellectual, intellectual come in from a specific realm who can provide some kind of input from that. But also, it's what Naval Ravikant calls, the co-founder of AngelList, calls unpermissioned leverage, right? Every time you do an episode,
Love that.
you're capturing like data, you're capturing
Yes.
branding, right? You're branding of the person who came on, the imprint of people who are watching that, and you're just building leverage, and it's an exponential growth cream, right? So it's one of the main reasons why I love doing this, because it's like something that's for free that you're just capturing value on. The more you do, the more weight it holds.
Yes, and you should remind your audience and people that you know in this field as well that the transcription of what we're speaking about as well will eventually happen as well, right? Like so the way that this conversation gets involved in the ethos of search and how people start to identify as material that they can reference and research, that's going to only grow as well. So can you imagine you and I having a conversation that's capturing a 2021 piece of whatever the culture and the history is right now might be studied in 2041. You know what I mean? In a very different way. And if you think about just how crazy the world is right now, it's going to be even more important for people to look back at 2020 and 2021 with this whole, what was going on? Like what happened? How did people survive, not survive, right? So it's an amazing time to really carve out how you want your voice to be a factor into your life. It is very difficult to be able to stop and say it's a main revenue source, like you said. But I think the other part of it is, and I don't mean to be, I don't mean to be a thing about this, but there is there's a multi-level marketing aspect to what's happening within podcasting right now that is really going to either turn a bunch of people onto it that you don't want, or a lot of people off to it because of that flavor. And it's prominent in the US right now, especially amongst realtors and especially amongst payday loan people and stuff. It's great. You've got a voice. I'm not making the rules. You're not making the rules. But we have to remember that with the mass adoption of it comes a couple of other things that people are like, yeah, it's like, remember for a while there, and I hate to digress, but remember for a while there when the internet was starting to come up, it was almost impossible to be able to open a browser without seeing like a pop-up, a dirty pop-up. And all of a sudden it was just like, what? And then that actually for a time period got people to say, no, you can't use that computer at work. No, you can't bring this. It's not secure. It's not this. It's not that. That's one of the things that I think is going to start to happen in podcasting a little bit, where we're going to go through an annoyance cycle because of an abundance. And people are going to have to come back to, okay, what are you doing with podcasting that makes you so special? And that's why I want to work with you or be on your show, So that's what I don't.
So do you think that there's too much noise in the ecosystem right now?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's very hard to validate yourself amongst that. The search for podcasts in general is horrible, right? I love the fact that the most used website for searching for podcasts, I can't remember the name of it, but the guy is so cocky about his entity because it's the most searched for, it's the whatever guide it is, it's one person who owns it. His entire Q&A on the website is about what he does. He's like, I'm not looking for business partners. Stop pitching me on stuff. I don't need your suggestion. I rank #1 already. Go look at another. I don't have advice for you. It's all based on stuff you can imagine that's been in his inbox because he's already proven out success. But I mean, there's a huge opportunity right now for just podcast search alone to be a factor in which you can benefit from being a part of the business. So we're at some really early stages right now, some exciting stuff, man.
Yeah. I mean, talking about that, like the podcast search, absolutely. Like I heard people talking about even like not even Google, Apple Podcasts, right? The search algorithm for podcasts there, it doesn't necessarily show you the most popular episode podcast.
No.
It recommends things on a very weird scale. So by growth or by like how many people are joining into it. So when you look at it, it recommends things based off of like how quickly the thing is growing. So you can have a very low follow rate and suddenly get promoted to a bunch of people and blow up, but then it'll wipe you away. But then really, really popular ones don't necessarily have, just because you're popular, but not having new subscription growth doesn't get the same kind of some kind of showcase. So a lot of weirdness going on there. You're right. So, let's little.
Sorry, just very quickly to that. This is something I say to people whenever I'm doing a talk or a conversation. I always remind people that the biggest search engines aren't search engines anymore. They're suggestion engines. And so we have to go back to the idea that because they're suggestion engines, you have to decide how you either become a part of their suggestion sphere or you fall within what you think the old school way is what the search sphere is. And I mean, it's so funny, everybody talks about search engine optimization, and I laugh and I'm like, we're not even searching anymore. It's, we're asking for it's a recommendation engine.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
tell me what you think I should be doing, not necessarily what the truth is. So anyway, I'm sorry for digressing like
No, I
that,
think
but
that's a really good point, right? Recommendation engines. Um, they're saying like the next Google or the Google killer or the next version of Google
oh
is
wait,
going to
I'm
be
gonna write this one down.
it's going to be it's going to be a search engine for algorithms, for search engine for like AIs, right? So more machine based, so less human input, right? But a bunch of machines can go out and search databases, find the relevant information that they can source, and bring it back to the human element, right? So recommendation based search, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That'll be interesting too, considering how many holes they currently have right now in information bias that's going through AI right now. I think a lot. I think the one aspect, it's funny. On one hand, I talk to people about ignoring all these privacy issues on social because you got to get on and understand how your digital footprint works. But on the other hand, I'm really petrified of the fact that, for 50% of the build and most of the AI stuff right now, diversity wasn't necessarily considered a factor. And so it'll be interesting to see where we net out. A lot of the complaints within the search sphere when it came to Google prior to their most recent update was the fact that websites from Mumbai indexed a lot higher in news ranking, and it was only because of abundance in search. So they had to fix that problem. And it'll be interesting if they start to see that in AI before they start to do what you referred to as the search of those algorithms, because we could be talking about a tipping point, on how they were like, oh, okay, before 2019, the studies indicated this, but when we started to take into consideration that not all these different other people lived in the world, then we factor it this way. It'll be interesting. That's fascinating. It's happening though.
yeah. Let's just cut back to a bit more about yourself.
Sure.
Like, you talked about blog.to, being one of the first to start podcasting, in Toronto, right? What does the evolution of that look like? Like, where'd you go from there? Like, how'd you go from there to what you do now?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'll give you a very quick rundown about who I am and what I do and what I've done.
Yeah.
I was a nice brown kid up until the age of about 28. I went to McMaster University. I got a job. I worked. I was thinking about what the heck I'm going to do with my life. And then at around, then what happened was I realized one morning I woke up and I was like, the epiphany, thought if I'm ever going to raise kids, I really want to find something I can contribute to. So at that time, there were no South Asians in behind the scenes in film and television. Deepa Mehta was really one of the only brown filmmakers. Srinivas Krishna was around, etc. And so I decided that I wanted to start the Toronto South Asian Film Festival. And in doing that, back in '99 with my partner Dinesh, we created a forum in which people could start to showcase their work outside of the traditional sphere. So we weren't Bollywood people, we also weren't Hollywood people. We were somewhere in the middle. We were lucky enough that trend started to grow as we did. So people started to come and watch movies that were more reflective of the North American experience and stuff. And from that, I got my first media job, which was within the Directors Guild of Canada. And I worked for Omni TV for about 8-9 years of my life. I was very much a product. I rode the diversity train for a bit, as I like to remind people, and it was very healthy for me. I played the game. I yes manned my way through a lot of conversations. I sat through ignorance. I sat through a lot of uphill battles. I was managed by 90% people who had no clue what I was trying to accomplish or do. But I use that, I leverage that into a position with CBC and then off to breakfast television for 8 years. And traditional TV guy who pretty much had an immigrant mentality. So I worked 6 or 7 jobs at a time.
Hmm.
I was Mo on 640 radio during the day. I was Mohit's movies on Flow 93.5 in the evening. I was Mo, the segment producer at breakfast television in the afternoon. I was covering a Bollywood red carpet in the evening. Not because I had this, I want to be popular, I want to be thing. It was because I needed to make money. Like
Hmm.
the media business did not have one opportunity for me to at that time make more than a teacher made. And I sort of stopped and I said, well, wait a minute, I gotta make this work then, work, right? And so it was great. I had so many amazing experiences as a result because I didn't really ask anyone for permission. And I'm one of the very few people that can say that he's interviewed George Clooney and Priyanka Chopra in the same day.
Hmm.
And I don't just name drop that. I use that experience now to share with people 2 things. One, how the content that I've been a part of has done something for the culture. So diversity ultimately did win, right? So it's a very important part. And 2, how seeking out new platforms and new opportunities within the digital space can mean so many good things for people to further their voice. And not just, audio voice, but like true platform usage right now is the best way to start to look at how to expand your sphere. I think we're past digital this, screen that. I think we really have to get back into that ownership. So I started Thinkstart in 2017 after my latest gig, which was at Cineplex Digital Networks, where I was leading several projects on digital there. And and that's where afterwards I presented them with something they weren't interested in. And I realized there was a plenty opportunity to go out. Now, don't get me wrong. What the struggle has been is that I have a lot of brainstorming meetings with people, and I open a lot of people's eyes up to what the potential can be. But it's really hard to carve a path to profit until you start to show how these platforms are starting to generate traction. So 2 years ago, when I'm pitching VR for education, they're not interested. But now everyone's interested,
Hmm.
right? 2 years ago, when I'm talking to people about Shopify as being their answer, they're like, yeah, there's so many other opportunities. And if this company started, then there's going to be so many companies like this. And now they're just like, oh, we got to get on Shopify. So I have had hiccups that way, and I have not been able to bring a lot of, especially my corporate contacts, into the mix when it comes
Hmm.
to leading. But at the same time, I'm using my thought leadership in much better places now to have conversations like this and to get clients in the right way. People who want to do cool things, interesting things.
Man,
So
that's quite a track record. That's an amazing resume right there. Like having all those kind of experiences behind you, especially in a rapid scale.
well, I said it rapidly. It was this has
How
been
much of a period of time was that?
okay, so it's kind of weird because technically this year marks my 20th year in television.
Mhm.
But as I described to you, I've done so many different things, right? So while on one hand, I have not worked 20 years full time in television, but I've had a TV show for 20 years that I've appeared on. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, yeah,
it's been
yeah.
a part of my ecosystem. I've either produced, directed, or been a part of for 20 years. I've been an ACTRA member for almost a decade now. And that doesn't mean I'm going to auditions so I can be in the Walmart commercial, right? So a lot of the learning that I want to do with people at this stage is for people to understand what the beta version of new media is, right? What you can learn from this earlier version that while things were being built, so you don't have to make the mistakes in the future. I'm watching YouTubers right now just flee, right? They're fleeing YouTube because they don't understand the algorithm. These people, that's how they got into parties back in the day. They were, oh, you got to let YouTuber, you got to invite this YouTuber, this person's going to come out. It was almost as YouTubers were more popular than DJs when you would go to parties and stuff like that. But what
Mm.
happened? Right? They weren't a creator platform. They are part of the suggestion platform. And so when YouTubers started to say, we built you, you should be giving us access and we should be working together on advertising and stuff like that. You know what YouTube said? They're like, no,
Hmm.
what are you gonna go somewhere?
Yeah.
Something else going? Are you going to go to Netscape? What are you going to go? Where are you going to
Mm.
go?
Yeah.
So, I just say that facetiously, but I mean it from the idea that I hope that the experiences that I've had really help people think a little bit more about, okay, how differently can I do this? What is next? How is this podcast for blog entries, right? How is the video clips that I'm using in multiple cases better off used in a webinar in the future? You know what I'm saying? I think that all of that stuff has to be the way we think in order to really not have to go through this loop again, which is, oh, look, 10 years from now, we got to get more diversity. And now we got to remember, oh, we didn't listen to them the first time. We didn't do it right. And we laid everybody off. Sorry. Think about how stupid the world feels right now as a result of all the doctors that they didn't give jobs about a decade ago because they didn't have Canadian experience.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about just that thought and how much different this country and this world would be in as a result of all those missed opportunities. I don't think we should do that in digital. I don't think we should do that in the way that we're creating media and content these days. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, Rethinking Your Content, was just let's talk about how we're feeding these systems a little bit and talk a little bit about how we make it something for us.
No, absolutely. I was gonna tie in your book. I checked it up previous to the episode. Rethinking your content. I mean, just listen to how you speak about content. You kind of have a sophisticated way of viewing this, especially coming from like a production standpoint, right? From an omni-channel point. I think you mentioned you did TV, you did radio, you did like a little bit of everything, right? Now podcasting as well. Let's talk a little bit about the book and the ideas behind it, rethinking content. How does that function into today's society?
Yeah, so I'll tell you two things. One is that I traditionally don't like to delve into anything without trying it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so I wanted to figure out what e-publishing was really about and why people found that there was a real value in it. So I started to explore that first. Then when I started to realize how BS half of the books were out there, I started to think, well, wait a minute, you guys are all perpetuating the same messages and just recycling it for different audiences. So that can't be healthy either. And so I have a background and a connection with Humber College and Humber Consulting Services. And I started to frame it with the idea that what if I took this on the road? What if I took my knowledge and took it on the road a little bit and what I know? So rethinking your content was simply the idea that if you take whatever your beautiful big idea is and you can put it through this rinse of understanding what the value can be for partnerships, for leveraging it, for optimizing it, for strategic communications, for tools. I just walk people through just how brilliant it really can be, but you have to think of it from this way. You can't think of it from let me get a time lapse of this and hope that 1 million people watch it because my song is on it. And therefore that's how I'm going to go viral. There's no such thing as organic traffic anymore. We have to be very strategic in the way we and it's not all or nothing. For example, this is one of your podcasts. A year, 2 years from now, you could do a podcast entirely on, growing herbs. Who knows? That's not going to be your one. This is not going to be your one contribution. You don't have one website you've created in your life. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
So I think that the idea and what I've tried to do with rethinking your content is to get people excited, about where the opportunities lie in some of these platforms, how you can use your content in many different ways, but also, and more so, look at it this way. When you're creating, you have to do one of two things. You're either pushing culture or you're pushing commerce. Okay. If you feel like you're pushing culture, great. It doesn't mean you're volunteering. It means there's something broader that you're thinking about and it's fulfilling something awesome. That or you're pushing commerce. There's something else that's going to lead to cash for what you're doing, to money, whatever it is. If you can, those are the only two ways that you should be attacking content. And my last thing I want to say to people is that if you have a content strategist that you have had on staff for a long amount of time, you should probably question what they're doing, because I feel like content strategists are really pulling the wool on over people's eyes. If you were a coach instead of a content coach, like you'd be fired every Monday morning, because content strategy doesn't exist in the way that people sell it. Content strategy is not about how your idea is going to work in this one place. It's now got to be platform strategy. You have to be able to tackle. They're not building these platforms so that you could be like, push one button, it's going to go everywhere, and you're going to be amazing. If they were doing that, they would have just been like, let's pair up with the button, right? Why do we have to go anywhere else? But I think so. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to mention about the book was that I wanted to be originally wanted to be the one who helped people write their books because I saw people doing blogs for weeks and weeks, and I was like, you guys have already written your book. You know what I mean? Like you guys have
Hmm.
spent 3 years writing. That's half your book right there. So you're the only reason you're not doing it is because no one's told you and walked you through what the opportunities are and where the pitfalls are. That's how I started originally. And that's how I branched into, wait a minute, there's way bigger problems. But the good news is once I did the first, the other two are already in progress and I'm really lucky. So if anybody has any questions about that sort of stuff, reach out because I'd be happy to walk them through what I was able to learn in the process and what I would avoid as well.
Yeah, I mean, e-publishing is definitely on the upkeep, like coming up and become more popular. But talking what you said, when if you're trying to create content, it's not about the content anymore; it's about the platform, right? Can we talk a little bit more about that? Like,
Yeah.
like when you're creating content, you have to be conscious of how the platform spreads that content or who's on that platform. Like, what does that mean?
100%. Yeah. So look at it this way. Every platform has its own dashboard, has its own report that it's giving you based on its audience insights or whatever you're looking to achieve. But if I was to say to you, hey, do you know why episode 3 of your podcast was removed from Spotify? What would you say to me? No,
But yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because you have a system, the way you distribute and the way it happens. But then if I show you 3 or 4 articles and say, hey, people's podcasts are being removed off of Spotify for blah blah blah, then you get a little bit worried, right? Think to yourself, well, why am I not, why is my one-stop shop solution not fitting? It's because all of these platforms are going through growth spurts, right? They're going through growths and changes where they are everything from load of service to potentially being bought. So we can't sort of live and die by the idea that all of these platforms kind of work the same way. Spotify will eventually become a suggestion ranking too, right? In which they want, stuff that is only on Spotify. I'm not saying this is true, but who knows, right? They might stop, say, all of our originals go first 5. And then where do you fit into the conversation, even if you've landed like the best interview somewhere? So we're a little ignorant to this one-stop solution idea, the same way we were ignorant to the idea that if you just put your website up, people will find it, right? And
Hmm.
so even platforms from a YouTube perspective, we just described it, Spotify, we just described it. If you start looking at the newer ones like Clubhouse, where are you going to get your guide to how to be functional on that? How are you going to start to make yourself a mark or prepared for that, knowing how it's going to change the audio conversation? In fact, I'm going to go on record right now and tell you this, that in the first quarter of this year, I guarantee that podcast listenership will fall as a result of Clubhouse,
Hmm.
just as a result of the fact that people are just tuned in for that same audio gap, that hour, that whatever that that you can plug into. I guarantee we'll see
Hmm.
a dip in that as a result. So what I was saying more so is that you don't need to be everywhere. You don't need to spread yourself too thin, but you need to understand that none of these platforms are actually living for you to be functional as one thing. You have to be able to understand where the value and where you leverage for best. If you know moms over the age of 40 are your target audience, then there's only 2 or 3 platforms that you need to be on,
Yeah.
right? If you know that Facebook Live is going to sell more merchandise for you, you got to figure out the best way to give your best Facebook Live. You're not going to do a Facebook Live that's simulcast as a webinar on Zoom that's going to then eventually become, a TikTok Live on the, I don't know, man. You got to figure that part out. Don't dilute your audience. It doesn't make sense. It's not, anyway, I'm just giving you therapy lessons.
Yeah. So if someone's starting out, and they want to create content, like, would it be best if they work backwards, like who's this content for, and aim it at that crowd rather than just create content for the sake of a wide scoping audience? Is that what you're
Well,
trying
I
to say?
mean, you can't kill the vibe, right? You would never say that because I'm sure a songwriter never sits down and stops and says,
Mm.
ballad, right? No, always be. How about we look at it this way? How about you take the idea and think about what platform is this for,
Mm.
right? And then you start to think a little bit, okay, well, why YouTube? Why does this make sense on YouTube? For some people, it'll just be TikTok because TikTok is their moment. So they've got this is their 2-year TikTok period, and that's the way they want to do it. But you'll notice that anybody who's just been a flavor of the week when it comes to any social media, they've never been able to transcend their audiences. It's not like Kim Kardashian has the same amount of people on all of her platforms. I guarantee she looks at her weakest one and stops and says, what gives? Right? Why aren't these people doing this? Some of the most popular YouTubers, when they turned the subscriber channel on, they couldn't get 1 million subscribers and their videos were getting 3 million hits, right? So I would say less, don't think about who the target's for and more about where you'll find the audience for it. And is that audience in the culture or is that audience in the commerce perspective for you? And
can you talk about the difference? What is the culture versus commerce? Like, what does that mean?
I believe that the creators in the digital world are just an extension of people who want to do one of two things and should only be doing one of two things. There's a massive amount of self-worth that comes from being able to create freely, being an artist, being somebody who just wants to jam, be a DJ, whatever. If you don't have to make money doing it, some cases you will, in some cases you won't. That's for the culture. That's why hip hop started out in the park, right? That's what they talk about. When they were in the park and they were rapping, they weren't rapping because there was going to be a record deal that eventually they were just like, no, hip hop started out in the park, right? We did it to communicate our stories with each other and make each other feel better by venting that. And it's the same sort of way that I kind of feel like if we're content creators, we should feel a little bit more like we have a hold on what it means to us intrinsically, right? And the same way, if somebody wants to make an independent film versus the Avengers, if you show them the check for the Avengers, they'll be like, no, I want to make it right. But there are also people who just want to make the independent film about the girl in the village. It's the same thing. That's the way we have to look at that from a cultural perspective. Now, the commerce perspective is different, and this is where I'm warning you not to get fleeced, and I'm warning people that I meet all the time. Don't be stupid. If you're creating this volume of content that you think is connecting with people and you think that there's a real avenue there's nothing but opportunity to make money through content. If you are somebody who's had a live event for the last 5 years and you didn't do one webcast this year, then you just threw away thousands of dollars. There's no reason why you shouldn't be using video and content as part of your commerce plan. There's not one industry. There's not one shopping industry. There's not like direct to consumer industry is what I mean. I'm sure the oil changing guy down the street will be like, what are you talking about, dude?
No, I think even those people, like, I think everyone has become a media player. Like, I think Gary Vee was talking about this 2 years ago, and he's now coming back and saying that, this is still the facts, right? It's like, it was on Twitter. It's trending on Twitter like for a while 2 years ago, and then now it's coming back up. It's that in 2010s, every company needs to be a technology company, aka deploying technology in some way. The 2010s, and 2020s, every company has to be a media company, because if you don't promote yourself through media, through content, what you stand for, what you believe in, what you're trying to do, what solutions you have, the problems you're trying to solve, right? Then people are not going to know you because there's too much noise. There's too much noise, right? Like this. Right.
Well, so and you have to own your story too, right? You have to own your story too, and that's another big part of it. We saw that. Sorry to cut you off. You can finish. I was just going to say that. We saw that in crisis management over the last 5 years, where a lot of companies weren't able to own their story when bad things happen as a result of not having the right digital communication mediums intact. Dove was a prime example. Dove did not have other than their larger Love Yourself campaign, they didn't have a large presence in social responsibility, right? So it became one of those, well, what do you do when you need to take care of backlash, when you need to make a statement, when you need to reach out to people that are beyond a press release? So that's another reason why people have latched onto it in the last few years. Yeah.
Going back to that kind of sentiment we were talking about, right? Like the idea of like being a media company. So we're seeing a phenomenon right now, and COVID has brought really heralded this, is that companies are now being evaluated not by their financials, but by their story, right? And the meaning of that, the reason for that is there's a lot more, less institutional. For the first time, the retail investor is outperforming institutional investors, where more people are putting their money directly into brands, right? I'm not sure if you're following this, but brands like BlackBerry are reporting their stock is up 150%. And they're like, there's no reason for a stock to go up. They didn't release out. There's no products coming on, nothing. And it's because retail investors are on the sideline coming together and overpowering the stock. They're pumping the stock because they believe in the brand. They want to park their money somewhere, right? So they're picking stocks and they're parking it and they're doing it together, right? People are still not sure if it's illegal or not, if it's a pump and dump, but like end of the day, like look at Tesla, right? Why are they trading at like almost 200 times their revenue? Right, becoming one of the most valuable, most valuable automotive companies in the history. Right, it's not because of their financials; it's because of the story. It's because of what they mean to people. And so the idea of like being able to deliver your story is becoming much more meaningful now than ever, because people are filtering through the noise. They're not trying to go through the details and be like, what are you actually doing? But they're trying to look for what you actually stand for. What could you become? Right. And I think that's very valuable in the landscape, because if you have a good story, if you can communicate that story really well, you can capture future value to solve those problems right now, right? Through these retail investments.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, you bring up the retail side, and I think that from a brand loyalty and a brand growth perspective, it'll be phenomenal to see one of the companies actually come to fruition for what the promise is. You know, it'll be nice to see a good comeback story, and especially if you know, digital media was a big part of that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it would be be nice to not have another Nortel in Canada, right? You know, when Nortel broke down, we were one of the heroes in the telecom business for the longest time in North America. And when Nortel broke down, Canada was you know, everyone jumped ship, and we didn't have a lot to offer in that space. In fact, I often think to myself how different our global digital footprint would have been in Canada if Nortel was one of those companies that we started to ride into the digital phase, but it broke down too soon for them to find that leverage. So anyway, yeah, I would love to see legacy brands start to become a little bit more in tune with how they can leverage their brands into a newer digital footprint and something that makes sense. But like you said, if we start looking at like things like pump and dump stocks and where nostalgia lies, and you know, I was talking to somebody about the retroation of the world, in that what tends to happen, and you know what, this might have been something from Clubhouse, so I'm going to warn you right now, this, because I can't, but what tends to happen is that we start to find comfort in rebuilding whatever we're involved with as a result of being nostalgic about stuff way before. So no, so 80s has had a renaissance a couple of different times in the way that, you know, this Generation X has, pardon me, the way that Generation X has approached their thing. So a lot of people who work in brands, etc., are sort of the thought leadership is around the idea that we're going to see a little less flying cars, can't wait for the future, and a little bit more comfort blanket. You can see it in the fashion already. You know what I mean? You can see it in a little bit of the half COVID inspired, half trashy 90s inspired looks that you're starting to see again. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that is welcomed into this space, right? Which is, you know, for instance, can you and I have a conversation about Street Fighter, right? And Street Fighter 2, and can we make it so that 10,000 other people would watch it? So it'll be interesting to see if that starts to bubble over as being more of stuff we're actually in tune with, rather than constant thought leadership and you should do this and you should do that and be better and be best and like all that sort of stuff, right? It'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I think that it's an exciting time, especially for the next generation, man. Like, it's for the next generation, it's super exciting because what they can do or are going to be able to do just with their phone is remarkable to me. I'm so super excited about it.
Absolutely. I did a talk at a high school, well, at 3 high schools last year, year before. And one of the things that has really blew my mind was like talking to the next generation, Gen Z, right? And I was part of a panel, and none of the panel knew that we were millennials. Millennials was a dirty word, right? Like that everyone talked about. The millennials, so like, you know, whatever. And when I told them, like, yo, we're the millennials, actually. They're Gen Z. They're cell phone natives. They've grown up with technology. They're not as hesitant as we are. You know, millennials still have to go to a laptop to sign into your bank account, We don't trust our phones as much, right? We need a big landscape. Where Gen Z, they're perfectly fine just buying like a $500 purchase straight off their phones, right? If they if they want a new Xbox or whatever, right? And like how that's going to move commerce, move digital. But look at like Generation Alpha, what's coming up after them. The people who are like 2-3 years old right now, who can go up to Alexa and be like, Alexa, why is the sky blue? Alexa, like, why is the sun so bright, right? What's the weather outside? They're interfacing the technology with voice, right? They can just ask and receive information. So how does technology evolve us, right? This is a really good quote where that I found really interesting, is that technology is what makes us human. When we invented fire, we lost the ability to eat raw meat, but we were able to consume higher calorie counts. It changed us. Our technology continuously makes us evolve and change what makes us be human, right? We instead talk back like, oh, before computers, before TV, we were more social. No, you look at that meme where like everyone's in a subway station reading newspapers, being antisocial, right? And it's like history, like our collective consciousness has evolved with our technology and change, and we've modified. So talking about what the future can come and become, like I think that's going to be very interesting, because very quickly the speed of change, we're not going to recognize what we're going to become versus like what we have become, right? Because the speed of change is going to become faster and faster.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the reason why I feel like I have a voice in what I'm doing, my friend. Like, I feel like I'm able to take that pause and at least acknowledge what that bridge has been from analog to digital, and
Yeah.
still have it from a cohesive place where I'm not doing the wag the finger like back in my day, but also super excited about what's ahead.
Yeah.
You brought up some great points. I know parents are struggling right now with smart speakers at home because kids aren't able to decipher between walking up to a couch and talking to it and asking, randomly a question in the kitchen. And that's a true issue that they're having. They don't understand the actual difference. The other aspect that I'm trying to remind people on is that voice search is entirely different. And so while we're sitting here trying to think about search engine optimization, I'm trying to get people to start thinking about voice search engine optimization, because eventually you want to start owning your audio brand in that capacity. I should be able to call out your podcast on my smart speaker and it shouldn't hesitate to come up. And so if you're not in a situation where you're starting to learn and own that space, then again, you're not putting yourself ahead in what you can. Stay cultural, right? Stay local, you know, do your thing for your audience. But if you want to be, a part of how you can grow it, then you need to start to think a little bit more about how you can
Understand the
value how it
platform.
makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's phenomenal. I don't. It's amazing. I'm in such a wonderful position where I don't have to prophesize about anything. I just have to explain it from the idea that there are questions going around in everyone's head right now, and so let's start to explore it from a good way, and let's start to put pen to paper too. I think the other part of it that's driving so many people nuts is, do I want to do, like, do I really? And doesn't it seem, and the analysis paralysis thing is like so 2018. You've got everything you can do between your phone and your iPad and a half decent microphone. You decide what you want to do with it as a result. The fact that I can DJ an entire wedding on my iPad now makes me believe that there's no reason why I can't be a DJ if I wanted to.
Yeah.
There is a reason. I was always horrible at beat matching. I could never beat match. I could never understand why. Just the feeling I had to play two songs together, it just didn't work. I was the worst.
There's AI DJs now, you can just act like you're doing the work.
Oh my gosh, I do know. And not only that, but one time I had asked a girl um, to make a mix for me based on about 20 Spotify links that I had sent her. And she didn't even send me the mix back. She sent me the app back. She just said, put it all in here. I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, this is the dad DJ who just sent you the thing. It's like saying, hey, can you make me a mixtape? And it's like, a mixtape can make itself now.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No.
it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to, actually I'm working on a new idea for a podcast right now that's supposed to be a limited series. And I think I'm going to try this time to pre-pitch it. I'm going to go out to people and just see if they want to, be on board early before I even try to go out there and book guests and do all that sort of stuff. And that's the other thing I will tell you is that I benefited immensely by doing podcast episodes to promote my book. And I have been so lucky. I've appeared everywhere from Dubai to this conversation to India, and the conversations are phenomenal. I haven't had one situation where I've been like, what's going on here? So it excites me because now I can stop and say I've done podcasts from around the world as well. And I understood the tone differences, the question differences, the need, the want, the broing out in some cases versus the sit there and listen. One podcast I was on, somebody only wanted to know about like my celebrity encounters based on celebrities I'd interviewed, and I had to constantly tie it back in to like, that doesn't make me. What makes me is that experience led me to believe that he was interested in the story, that blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
So it's been a ride. I can't wait to do another one. I'm hoping to get another book done within the next 2 months. And I also have a diversity initiative I'm working on as well to get corporations to start to celebrate some of their victories with employees too. So yeah, should be interesting.
That's great. I mean, that's got quite a spread of things you're involved with.
Yeah.
With Thinkstart, you talked about it being like a collection of freelancers. Is that what it is? Are you trying to bring a collective together to do microtasks together?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I don't believe that any of the projects that I pitch for have a 2 to 3 year span to them yet, because we're like technology is catching up. With 5G being implemented, for example, your VR and AR adoption is going to be entirely different. With iPhone 12s, your AR adoption and storytelling is going to be a big part of what Snapchat does later. But I sit with clients and work on, well, how are we prepared for that from the idea standpoint first, and then work in to how it's efficiently done, the creatives involved and stuff. So I can only afford to do that if I bring in the senior minds at the right time. I can't mitigate your risk on this as a result of having salaries for you to pay for. So it's crumbling the agency model to a point where if you said to me tomorrow, I've got $5,000 to do a podcast, I know how to get that in action without having to get my team together, et cetera, et cetera. I just have, the team to do it. Does that make sense? So I'm in some ways, I guess I'm a glorified agency in that respect, but I would rather have the people that I know how to do things currently doing them than sitting waiting for the business to be done. And I think I benefit by, coming in at a reasonable cost that way too. I'm not doing what ridiculous agencies, and to be honest with you, agencies are calling anyway. So they know that there's a huge value to thought leadership and then the exploration of the way things should be happening, and explain, teams aren't sitting around lunchrooms anymore and having casual conversations. Oh yeah, you should check that out. You should read this article, blah, blah, blah. That's not happening anymore. So I'm trying to wedge myself somewhere in between being useful and being useless.
Yeah. I mean, talking about that, and like, when as a professional, you seem to be in a lot of places at once. You're writing books and you're publicizing them, doing podcasts, you're teaching people how to do podcasts, you're running this agency, you're taking the diversity leadership. You seem to be spread out in so many different facets. How do you organize and manage yourself? How does that time management work?
I don't have an answer for you.
Do you have a system, or do you just kind of flow in the moment of things?
No, I definitely have multiple systems on the go, and I'm extremely proud of being able to do what I've been able to do. But I think the smarter answer is I don't know how else to do it. So I work extremely well with others. I've never had any issue with that. I know how to outsource when I don't know how to. You know what it is, honestly, dude? I know what I don't know how to do. And that's the bigger part of finding any way to be, in my downtimes, I can turn to my partner and my wife, who is my wife, and stop and say, it's not working the way that I thought it was going to work, and find the confidence to work it in that same conversation, right? I can work with my webmaster on a project and communicate what the exact problem is as a result of understanding the system, but not having to be the designer. So I know what I don't know how to do, and that's been a big eye-opening experience to being able to do, we haven't talked about my other media properties where my ownership is and stuff like that. And that's not because I need the promotion. I want you to big me up and stuff, but it's also because until until I've got that value to offer, why am I sitting there telling you about, oh, look, wait till you see this, man. It's like, it's Jaws meets Spider-Man. You're going to love it. No, I'm past that point in my life where I need to pretend to be something that I'm not. And so the short answer to your question is, I don't know how to not be busy. And I know that I'd probably be way better off if I focus one day at a time on stuff. But I'm also extremely grateful for the opportunities and experiences I've been able to have. And just got to make it happen while you can, dude.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that. I'm personally like that. I love working on different things. I like being busy, and I feel like in my mind, it all ties together. It's like one big vision. It's all like micro parts to it all. But other people look at it and be like, why are you doing all this? Like, why aren't you focused on one thing at a time? Have you gotten pushback on that, blowback? Have you ever doubted yourself and thought, maybe I should do things, like more like systematically?
Dude, just to get on this call, I doubted myself because of the Skype problems that we were having. Just like, is this the right? Am I doing? Do I look like an idiot? No, listen, it's not. There's no. One of the reasons I got into the business that I got into was that there was nobody there to guide me, right?
Yeah.
So originally when I was in film and TV, I thought to myself, I don't want a brown kid growing up in Canada who had every opportunity to put up his hand and ask the right question to still feel like they shouldn't put up their hand and ask the right question. And so when I started to look at the career path that way and realized that everyone, when I first started, especially leaving business into film and TV, it was just kind of like, what, why, you're dumb, don't do it. And then, you went through that slight embarrassment too, where all your brown friends were starting to get married and you're just like, I'm still, started from the bottom. You know what I mean? I'm just started. I'm doing it, blah, blah, blah. And then you started to get the accolades. And then all of a sudden the families, friends would call the parents. And then all of a sudden the parents were more interested and you're moving in the direction that you envisioned and stuff. But nothing was somebody leaving breadcrumbs and me following it. It was half gut. It was half the reassurance that I could still not have to make sacrifices that would hurt family or hurt myself or even hurt, or have to physically move. I made so much happen in Toronto, dude, that you could not make happen if you were a reporter in LA or New York, just because of the lack of access, because of how narrow-minded they were about who could cover what, about what type of producer should be on the red carpet, about what type of person should be in front of this A-list celebrity. I was the best C-string reporter that City TV ever had because I never said no to anything. You know what I'm saying? And I ended up getting some life-changing moments as a result. I didn't say no to working on the Sunday. I didn't say no to working for free as their film critic for a year. I just, so when you say finding ways to put it all back together, imagine the stories I have to share now, right? So I'm lucky that none of it comes with this idea that I'm not up here at all. I want to have the conversations with as many people as possible. But if you can learn anything from some of the stuff that I've done or ways that I've fallen on my face or being the only brown kid in the room, do it. Because that's the only way we learn and progress. So there's no magic solution. The pushback will always happen. The pushback happens on yourself daily when you wake up and you stop and say, oh, shit, I'm doing that again. Do I got to go back? What did I do? Was this the right edit? Did I save it as this? Does new edit mean right edit? I always, latest edit. That's the worst thing to fucking ever, excuse my language. That's the worst thing to ever label anything is latest edit. I always laugh. But anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. I think that you are much more forward thinking about how you feel like you can really utilize these platforms to your capability. And I love the fact that you're out here and you're doing it, because as you engage these people, like I looked at the way you've booked guests and stuff, and I thought to myself, see, this is so smart, because you've booked people that don't think that they have something to offer. Like you've booked people that are pretty cool about their idea and their thoughts and stuff, but you brought out like why they think that their idea is slightly revolutionary or could change the game or stuff. And that's tough, man, especially to product people, for people who know how they could like put things together and shit. I want to sit here for 30 minutes while you're like trying to get it in their brain. So kudos to you. I don't know how we got onto you in this situation, but kudos to you for being able to do it.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, that's kind of what I aspire to do with this podcast. Like, really, it was to find people who are in the mix of doing something really cool and promoting them by showing how it all evolves into something bigger, right? So it's really cool that you caught that. Thank you. By the way, how did you find the podcast? Like, was it a recommendation engine that brought your attention? Were you searching something?
I remember, dude. Sorry. I'm sorry. It's been such a crazy, I remember looking at the YouTube page and thinking to myself, this is dope. And then putting it sort of to the side. And then it might have come back again in LinkedIn somehow as, oh, this is that. And then I went on a mission just to figure out how. You know what's weird about podcasting searching and the way that I've been researching it? I haven't taken borders into consideration. So in the, for instance, I just did a fitness podcast that is based out of Australia that was recorded in Florida. And that was for the fitness business so that they could start to understand how they can use social media beyond Instagram. So the real problem right now is the last 5 years in the fitness industry, most professionals have gone all in on Instagram. And obviously when the pandemic happened and they weren't working with clients one-on-one, they wanted to understand a little bit more about what more opportunities are out there in this conversation. Now, granted, it's not as simple as that. It was we had a very good conversation and stuff. It wasn't a surface level, it's something they could have Googled, but it was awesome. So what I'm saying is that I didn't necessarily look at the search for trying to find you as being something, oh, where can I find Canadians? Where can I find somebody who might know me and stuff? I just kind of went based on what I like the look and the feel to be.
Cool. Yeah, Mohit, man, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time and for coming on. I really appreciate it.
And I'm really sorry about the first time in December. I had a real issue with my Google. And the worst part was I lost a ton of great contacts as a result because I just started up my Thinkstart email. And anyway, sorry. I apologize for that. So thanks again.
No problem. I'm glad we got this done. And for everyone who followed on, thanks for listening. And Mohit, stick around for a quick debrief. Thank you.